This happened a long time ago, but I still remember every detail like it was yesterday. I've never liked camping, not even a little. The dirt sticks to everything, bugs crawl on you when you're trying to sleep, and those thin sleeping bags somehow turn into hard, cold rocks by morning. But none of that mattered to my dad. He was the tough, outdoors-obsessed type who believed the woods could fix anything. Every summer when I was a kid, he would drag me deep into the wilderness with his equally tough friends, saying we needed to disconnect from technology and reconnect with nature. To me, it just felt like being forced into survival training I never signed up for. By the time I reached my sophomore year of high school, I couldn't stand it anymore. I finally worked up the courage to ask if I could bring a friend along, someone my age, to make the trip less miserable and a lot less lonely. To my surprise, he agreed almost immediately. Like he was relieved I wasn't refusing to go entirely. So I invited my school friend Charles, hoping that with him there, the long days, the silent nights, and the endless trees wouldn't feel quite so suffocating. Though I had no idea things were about to get far worse than uncomfortable. You'd think bringing Charles would have made the trip even worse, especially since he used to be a hardcore Boy Scout and actually loved camping, but he wasn't unbearable about it. Sure, he teased me for hating the outdoors, but he wasn't one of those guys who acts like you're weak if you don't enjoy sleeping on the ground. Honestly, I figured if I had to suffer out there, at least I'd have someone with me who knew how to start a fire and set up a tent without everything collapsing. Charles was excited to come, not just because he loved camping, but because back then he would jump at any chance to get away from his parents. Unfortunately, the trip went wrong before it even really began. One of my dad's friends had completely messed up the campsite reservation. Instead of some quiet, remote place deep in the woods, we ended up in this overcrowded, overbuilt campground with paved paths, indoor bathrooms, and even a playground full of screaming kids. It didn't feel like camping at all, more like sleeping in a public park. My dad was furious, but things got even stranger when we realized what was right next to the site. Just beyond the trees stood a small amusement park, complete with flashing lights, carnival games, a Ferris wheel slowly turning in the distance, and roller coasters that rattled the air every few minutes. It felt wrong, like two worlds that were never meant to touch had somehow collided. The adults complained non-stop about how this wasn't real camping, while Charles kept repeating the same thing, cracking jokes about how my family clearly didn't know what the outdoors was supposed to be. At first it was funny, then it just got irritating. I snapped at him to drop it, and thankfully he did. We had driven for hours, so leaving wasn't an option. With no choice, everyone started setting up camp anyway. While the grown-ups grumbled and dragged their feet, Charles suddenly switched into expert mode. In minutes, the tent was perfectly pitched, every knot tight, every stake hammered in like he'd done it 1,000 times. Even my dad, a man who rarely praised anyone unless they were injured or dying, gave a small nod of approval. For some reason, that bothered me more than anything else, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe because something about the whole place already felt off, like we weren't supposed to be there at all. Charles and I were sharing a tent, and once everything was finally set up and dinner was over, we told the adults we needed to organize our stuff. That was the excuse. The truth was, Charles had smuggled in a small metal pipe and a little bit of weed hidden inside an old mint tin. It wasn't a lot, just enough to make us feel bold and careless. Back then, we were in that stupid teenage phase where breaking small rules made us feel powerful. I don't smoke anymore, and sometimes I wonder if I ever even liked it, or if I just wanted to prove I wasn't like everyone else. We slipped quietly into the darker part of the woods, laughing under our breath like we were getting away with something huge. The trees felt thicker at night, the shadows longer, and the sounds sharper, like the forest was listening. When we finished, we didn't even worry about the smell. We planned to avoid the adults anyway. We crawled back into the tent, talking for hours about school, people we didn't like, and things we thought we understood about the world. But the more the night settled in, the more restless we felt. Sleep wasn't happening. That's when Charles gave me this mischievous smile, the kind that meant trouble. At first, I thought he wanted to wander around the campsite, which sounded boring. But then he said he meant the amusement park. That instantly got my attention. He joked about climbing to the top of one of the roller coasters. We used to climb anything we could. Buildings, trees, abandoned structures. It gave us a rush. The idea of standing at the top of a roller coaster in the middle of the night felt insane and irresistible. So we waited. After midnight, when every tent around us was quiet and dark, We grabbed our flashlights and slipped out. The air felt colder now, heavier somehow. The fence around the park wasn't even difficult to climb. With a quick boost from Charles, we were over and inside within seconds. The amusement park was almost completely dark, rides frozen in place like giant skeletons against the sky. But it wasn't empty. In the distance, we could see security guards walking slow, lazy patrols under dim lights. And for some reason, even though we'd done reckless things before, something about being inside that silent park at that hour made my stomach tighten, like we had just stepped somewhere we weren't meant to be. Every so often, we heard the low electric hum of a security golf cart somewhere in the darkness, drifting closer and then fading away again. It felt like we were inside some stealth video game, moving from shadow to shadow, holding our breath whenever lights swept across the ground. We crept through the park slowly, crouching behind snack stands, ducking beside silent rides, always watching the guards' patterns. At one point, we had to dash across a wide-open road when a flashlight beam suddenly appeared, our shoes slapping the pavement louder than we expected. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it could be heard from across the park. It was terrifying, but also weirdly exciting, like danger itself was fueling us. We both knew that if we got caught, things wouldn't just be a slap on the wrist. Still, we kept going until we finally reached the roller coaster. Up close, it looked enormous, a twisted mountain of steel disappearing into the night sky. Running along its side was a narrow set of maintenance stairs, steep and exposed. Without even speaking, we started climbing. Each metal step gave a soft, hollow clang that sounded deafening in the silence, and for long stretches there were no railings at all, just empty air on either side. The higher we went, the stronger the wind felt, pushing cold air through our clothes. When we finally reached the top, the view was unreal. The entire park spread out below us, dark pathways, motionless rides, distant lights flickering like dying stars. For a moment, everything was perfectly still, like the world had stopped. We took one quick photo, hands shaking, not daring to use the flash. Part of me wishes we had taken more, but we were too scared of being spotted. After a few minutes, the excitement faded into a heavy, uneasy feeling, like we had pushed things too far. So we decided to head back down. Once we reached the ground again, we began sneaking through the park the same way we came, moving carefully through the darkness, not knowing that the worst part of the night was still waiting for us. For some reason, getting back felt much faster than sneaking in. Maybe the guards had relaxed their patrols, or maybe we were just moving quicker because the adrenaline was wearing off. Either way, we were only about 5 minutes from the fence where we'd entered when we suddenly had to freeze. A security guard rolled by in a golf cart, its headlights cutting across the pavement, forcing us to dive behind a small snack shack and stay perfectly still. That's when I noticed something move in the darkness ahead. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, maybe a shadow shifting as the cart passed. But then Charles grabbed my arm and pointed to the exact same spot. I focused harder, squinting into the dim space between two buildings, and that's when I saw it clearly. About 30 feet away, crouched low to the ground just like we were, was another person. They weren't wearing a uniform, and they didn't look like a kid either. Whoever it was seemed to be hiding, watching, waiting. The worst part was the feeling, this cold certainty that they were staring directly at us. My chest tightened and my mouth went dry. Suddenly, the guards weren't the scariest thing in the park anymore. We wanted to move, to run, to do anything, but we couldn't risk it while the cart was still nearby. So we stayed frozen, barely breathing, eyes locked on that shadowy figure. Then, slowly, deliberately, it started to move. He suddenly sprinted across a strip of open pavement, cutting straight through the weak yellow light of a street lamp. For just a second, one clear, horrible second, I saw him properly. It was a man, just like I feared. His clothes were torn and filthy, hanging off him like they'd been dragged through mud. One side of his body looked wrong, stiff and uneven, like he was injured or twisted somehow. But what made my stomach drop was his face. There was something dark smeared across it, thick, shiny, and unmistakably wet. Even in that dim light, it looked like blood. Charles saw it too. I could tell by the way his fingers tightened around my sleeve. We didn't speak, but the fear in his eyes matched mine exactly. Then the man slipped back into the shadows and vanished between the buildings, as if he had never been there at all. A few seconds later, the guard's cart rolled past us, completely unaware. The moment it was safe, we moved fast. Neither of us said a word. The fun was gone. The thrill was gone. Every sound behind us felt like footsteps. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced we were being followed, but the park looked empty again. We climbed the fence in silence, dropped down on the campsite side, and this time there was no laughing, no high fives. All I wanted was to get inside the tent and zip it shut, like a thin layer of fabric could protect us from whatever we had just seen. When we crawled into our sleeping bags, we didn't even pretend to sleep. We just lay there staring into the darkness, whispering possible explanations. Maybe it was a homeless guy sneaking around. Maybe he'd gotten hurt somewhere. It sounded weak, even as we said it, but it was the only thing our brains could handle. Eventually, the forest sounds returned to normal, and the night dragged on. When morning came, everything seemed ordinary again. Sunlight, birds, the smell of coffee drifting through the campsite, but neither of us felt normal anymore. We got up the next morning, ate a quick breakfast, and started packing our gear for a fishing trip like nothing had happened. The sunlight made everything feel normal again, almost peaceful, and for a moment, I wondered if we had exaggerated the whole thing in our heads. But around 10 a.m., a campground staff member walked through the area, stopping at each site to deliver an announcement everyone was meant to hear. His voice sounded tense, rehearsed. He told us that a man had been stabbed to death the previous night at a lake about 4 miles away. Details were limited, but the killer hadn't been caught. The sheriff's office had warned all nearby camps and park staff to stay alert because the suspect could still be in the area. Then came the description. A disheveled white male in his late 30s, shirtless, possibly injured, possibly covered in blood. My stomach dropped so hard it felt like I might throw up. Charles and I looked at each other, both of us instantly understanding the same horrifying truth without saying a word. It had to be the man we saw, the one hiding in the park, the one staring at us in the dark. The staff member told everyone to pack up and leave immediately for safety reasons. All around us, people began moving quickly, voices low and uneasy. But Charles and I stayed silent. We didn't tell my dad. We didn't tell the rangers. Even now, I don't fully understand why. At that age, the fear of getting in trouble for sneaking into the park felt bigger than doing the right thing. It's something that still eats at me. Maybe if we had spoken up, they would have caught him sooner. Maybe someone else wouldn't have gotten hurt. Charles and I stayed friends over the years, same college, similar careers, but we almost never talk about that night. When we do, there's always this heavy pause, like both of us are thinking about how close we came to something truly evil. Because the truth is, we weren't just near a crime scene. We were only a few feet away from a murderer hiding in the dark, watching us, deciding something, and I try not to imagine what might have happened if he had chosen differently. This happened back in October 2016, right when that creepy clown hysteria was all over the news. People were reporting clown sightings everywhere, and while most were clearly fake or attention seekers, a few were genuinely terrifying, including what happened to me. I was 16, a junior in high school, and had just finished 7th period. After saying goodbye to my friends, I hopped on the 6th train, heading uptown. The car was mostly empty, which was unusual, but not unheard of. I wasn't paying much attention anyway, headphones in, music blasting, probably Drake, and my eyes glued to my phone reviewing chem flashcards. I was as unaware as a person could be, and looking back, that was a terrible idea. I knew the area well enough to think I'd be fine, planning to get off at 96th and walk home. Nothing unusual, just a normal Wednesday. The train rolled into 96th, and I jumped up instinctively, barely glancing to confirm the stop. This routine was so automatic that I hardly thought about it. Get off, step onto the platform, keep walking. My head was still buried in my phone, music still pumping, when the doors slid open. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something blocking my path. I looked up, and my stomach dropped. Someone had stepped right into the doorway. But it wasn't just a person, it was a clown. Bright, garish makeup, a wild orange wig, a grotesque painted smile that stretched too wide across his face. My heart slammed in my chest, adrenaline spiking instantly. I froze, unsure if I should back up, run, or just pretend I didn't see him. Every instinct screamed that this wasn't a joke. Something about the way he stood there, perfectly still, almost deliberate, made it feel like he was waiting for me, watching, calculating. The empty train car and the late afternoon sunlight outside did nothing to ease the horror. I could feel my pulse thundering in my ears, my hands gripping my backpack tightly, and all I wanted was to get off that train and out of the station as fast as possible. That moment, that split second of realization, was pure terror. He was wearing the full nightmare clown getup, oversized rainbow pants, a baggy yellow shirt held up by bright red suspenders, giant red shoes that looked like they could trip him at any moment, and white makeup smeared across his face in a grotesque, exaggerated smile. Red nose, blue painted eyebrows, the whole cartoon horror package. The only thing missing was the wig, but honestly, that didn't matter. He was terrifying enough as it was. I froze, completely rooted to the spot. My brain refused to process what I was seeing. I had never been this close to something so utterly bizarre and wrong. He didn't speak. He didn't move toward the train, but he made it very clear I wasn't going anywhere. A surge of panic hit me. I had maybe 5 seconds before the doors started to close, and I realized I had to act. I tried to brush past him, just enough to get through, but the moment my shoulder touched him, he bent down like a predator, forcing his face toward mine in one smooth, horrifying motion. My stomach lurched. Every instinct screamed at me to move, and I bolted, sprinting past him, just as the doors began to close behind me. That's when he lunged, trying to tackle me, and I barely dodged him. The chase was on. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it could burst, and the sound of his jerky, uneven steps echoed behind me. There was no one else around. The station was eerily empty that early afternoon. I stole a glance back and saw him gaining on me. His movement was unnatural, limbs jerking like they didn't quite fit together, but my eyes widened when I noticed what he was holding in his hand. Then I noticed what he was holding: a kitchen knife. I have no idea where he had hidden it or what he planned to do, but I didn't wait to find out. My legs pumped like never before as I bolted up the stairs and out of the station, gasping for air and heart pounding in my chest. Once I hit the street, I called the police immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. He didn't follow me outside, but I couldn't shake the image of his twisted grin or the thought that he might somehow know where I lived. The police sent someone down to the station, but by then, he was gone, vanished into the city like a shadow. Even after they reassured me that I was safe, I couldn't rid myself of the lingering fear that he might return. Weeks passed before I could even think about commuting alone without a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Looking back, it's crazy to think how close I came to something truly horrific. Nothing else ever happened, and I wouldn't be surprised if my story ended up as just one of the dozens of strange clown sightings reported that fall. But for me, the memory never really left. That one afternoon, a routine subway ride turned into a brush with danger I'll never forget. It's not your typical scary story, but it's real, and it stays with you. A few weeks after the subway encounter, I was scrolling through job listings online, looking for any odd gig to fill my free time. That's when I found something that made me pause. A private lifeguarding job at a hotel a few towns over. On paper, it sounded normal enough, but the details were off. First, the hours were completely backward. Instead of a regular daytime pool schedule, they wanted someone to supervise from 5 p.m. to 1 a.m., essentially a night shift for a pool. Strange, but not terrifying. Then came the real kicker. The listing specifically requested someone who did not speak Spanish. That didn't make sense at all. I've spoken Spanish since I was a kid. I'm half Mexican, and the town itself had a large Spanish-speaking population. The requirement felt wrong, like some kind of warning I couldn't understand. Still, the pay was ridiculous, $30 an hour. For a teenager barely scraping by, that was enough to ignore the red flags. I decided I'd just pretend not to speak Spanish, if asked, and applied. Within a few hours, they contacted me for an interview. Fast forward to the first day. I pulled up to the hotel, and everything looked normal, well-maintained grounds, bright lobby lights, the usual cheerful summer energy. But as I walked toward the pool area for my orientation, an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. The pool was empty, silent, except for the faint hum of the filtration system. The night was unusually still, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should have. I shook it off, telling myself I was overthinking it. That would be my first mistake. From the moment I stepped onto the deck, I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like someone, or something, was hiding just beyond the pool lights, waiting for the right moment. A pudgy, Mexican-looking guy came out to greet me, and at first, he seemed friendly, cracking jokes, laughing, and making the whole check-in feel casual. His easygoing attitude put me at ease, and for a moment, I thought maybe this job wouldn't be so strange after all. But then, as we walked deeper into the hotel complex, a taller man suddenly appeared around a corner. The way he stared at me made my stomach twist. I could feel it immediately. I was being tested, and every instinct in my body told me this wasn't normal. He stepped closer and began speaking to me in Spanish. I understood every word perfectly, but I gave him a blank stare. He wasn't asking anything threatening, just talking about the weather, small talk, but it didn't matter. I knew exactly what he was doing. That job listing wasn't a mistake. They were making sure I couldn't speak Spanish. After a few tense seconds, the first guy looked at him, and suddenly both of them burst out laughing like it had all been a setup. The taller man, now smiling, extended his hand and said he was just messing with me. Relief washed over me, but it was laced with unease. The taller guy introduced himself as Esteban, and the friendly one was Jefe. I shook their hands, trying not to let my nerves show, but the feeling that something about this night was off lingered, like a shadow I couldn't shake. The three of us walked through the hotel complex toward the pool, and the taller guy, the one I assumed was in charge, began explaining the job. According to him, they wanted someone to work the late hours so they could start charging non-guests to use the pool and increase revenue. I didn't know if that was legal, but I wasn't about to argue. Then he mentioned the strange requirement from the listing. They specifically wanted someone who didn't speak Spanish. His explanation was even weirder. It was supposedly to prevent rowdy outsiders from trying to harass me. I didn't fully understand it, but I nodded along anyway. My responsibilities were simple, at least on paper. Watch the pool, collect money from anyone trying to sneak in, and call Jefe if there was a problem. But then he added one more rule that made my stomach tighten. If anyone showed me a blue wristband, I was to let them into the pool house, a huge building behind the lifeguard stand. I didn't ask questions, I didn't want answers. The first week passed without incident, and actually, the first few weeks were surprisingly chill. There were more people at the pool than I expected, so I stayed busy, keeping an eye out and collecting money from outsiders. No one had shown me a wristband yet. Then, about a month in, it happened. A random day, middle of the evening, a tall, buff Hispanic man in sunglasses and a crisp white button-down approached me. He didn't speak a word of English. His presence alone made the air feel heavier, and for some reason, my instincts screamed that this wasn't just another guest. I felt that same prickling fear I'd had the first time I stepped onto the hotel grounds. He showed me the blue wristband, and I unlocked the pool house for him. About an hour later, he came out and started walking toward the exit gate. The door locked automatically behind him, so I didn't have to interact with him again or go down to the pool house, but I watched him leave. His backpack looked way heavier than when he had arrived, and for a split second, my mind flashed with questions. What was he hiding in there? But everything else seemed normal, so I shook it off. Over the next few weeks, more people started showing me wristbands, and increasingly, they arrived in groups. At the same time, more non-guests began using the pool, which meant I was collecting far more money than ever before. Eventually, I realized something strange. People weren't just paying the right amount, they were overpaying, repeatedly, by a ridiculous margin. I called Jefe to ask about it, but he brushed me off quickly, telling me not to worry, and that people make mistakes all the time. He didn't want to discuss it any further and hung up while I was mid-sentence. That brief call left a weird pit in my stomach. Something about the whole operation felt off, like there was more going on behind that locked pool house than anyone was letting on. That short, seemingly harmless phone call confirmed what my gut had been whispering all along. I was involved in something far bigger than lifeguarding a pool. As soon as I hung up, the gravity of the situation hit me like a punch to the chest. My mind went silent except for one terrifying thought I couldn't shake. Money laundering. I didn't know what to do. On one hand, every instinct told me to quit immediately. On the other, I had no proof, and giving up $30 an hour felt insane. So I stayed silent and kept the job. From that moment, pieces started falling into place. The so-called pool house wasn't just a building, it was a hub for something illegal. Gambling, drugs, maybe worse. It was all happening right behind me every day, hidden by a single locked door. Patrons, especially the wristband wearers, became increasingly friendly. They learned my name, waved, tipped me, smiled. The more comfortable they got, the more careless they became with their conversations in Spanish. And that's when I realized everything I had suspected was true. Despite knowing, the perks kept me hooked, and I even had a moment of real heroism. A kid wandered too far into the deep end, clearly unable to swim. I dove in and pulled him out. When I surfaced, the pool erupted in applause. Later, the boy's father appeared. It was someone important. I would find out, and he thanked me personally. For a brief, shining moment, I felt like a hero, but that feeling was short-lived. The next day, Jefe, Esteban, and several other men, some wristband wearers, greeted me with glasses of wine. At first, it felt flattering, almost glamorous. Then, one man made a toast in Spanish. I didn't understand everything, but the tone chilled me. They were celebrating the money they were making and the lives they were destroying. The next day, my heart sank further. My mom called while I was at the pool, and after speaking to her in Spanish, I turned to head back, and there he was, Esteban. The friendly facade from day one was gone. He stood in my path, eyes locked on me, silent. After a tense pause, he asked how long I had known Spanish. I lied, but he saw through me instantly. My pulse raced. I felt frozen, like a mouse under a predator's gaze. For a moment, I truly feared he could decide my fate right then and there. Finally, he said only, "Okay," and turned away. I returned to my post, trembling, debating whether to leave, but unable to risk it. Every thought screamed danger. They probably knew where I lived, and any sudden move could be a test. Minutes later, before my shift ended, he approached again, told me to come an hour early tomorrow for a new opportunity, tipped me a couple $100, and walked back into the hotel. That was it. I never returned. When I left that hotel, I was done for good. There was no safe ending. I don't think I was ever followed, but the paranoia lingered for months. Every van or suspicious car made my stomach drop. Nights were sleepless, filled with thoughts of what could have happened. Even now, years later, there are pieces I still don't understand. They were moving drugs, I'm sure of that. But why me? My best guess, they needed a clueless employee on payroll who could act innocent if the cops ever came. I was closer to losing my life than I ever realized. And if there's one thing I remember clearly about Esteban, it's that there was one thought on his mind, and one only, and it wasn't friendly. Some doors should never be opened, and some jobs should never be taken. Subscribe for more true horror stories. See you in the next nightmare.